And good morning, everybody. It's me, Robert Phoenix, with the Astro Weather for the 9th of March, 2023. I hope everybody is having a wonderful start to their day. And if you're already deep into your day, I hope it's progressing gracefully, that you're having a graceful experience on this lovely, lovely day. All right, let's see what we have here. Let's get into it. Let's get into the Astro Weather. So here we go. I tell you, that full moon in Virgo. Before I get into where we are with the weather, that full moon in Virgo, that was quite an exposition, wasn't it? It all starts with 40,000 hours of January 6th footage showing up at Fox News, right? And we're seeing sort of the critical exposition of things that had not been seen before. They were not shown. They were left literally on the cutting room floor of democracy. And over the last 24 hours, again, reverberating under the absolute glare of that critical Virgo full moon, standing out against the swampy mob of all that Pisces in the background, you have video footage of, guess who? The Buffalo shaman, the QAnon shaman. And here we go, right? The true node, 4 degrees Taurus. So guess what? It's in the first decan. And we're getting that image of Jake Chansley being escorted around the Capitol building, right? And we're seeing this, right? We're seeing the sort of the distillation of that buffalo energy. You know, even though the buffalo and the bull aren't the same, they are definitely related, right? And with this Virgo, this is the thing about the Virgo full moon, is that it discriminates. And what we saw in what we're seeing in the aftermath is who people really are. And for many of us, we've already known these things. But the more that politicians like Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer put down this effort to illuminate what happened on that day, January 6th, and the more that the various news outlets condemn this effort, the clearer it becomes. You know, the brighter the contrast, or the sharper the contrast. So, and it's not just happened during this full moon and then the event is exposed and we move on. No, this is ongoing. And I'll tell you what's really interesting too, is that Mitch McConnell, who came out and absolutely slammed Fox News and Tucker Carlson, he fell last night. He fell down some stairs and was taken to the hospital. Here we go. The moon in Libra balances everything out, right? That's where we are now. The balancing comes into play. We have the exposition of the critical nature of the situation. And the moon in Libra brings what? Justice, balance. The scales begin to even out here a little bit. And so we have an inconjunct going on with Mercury and the moon. And it's interesting because Mercury and Pisces, again, it's very, very subjective, really, really subjective. And so we're in this kind of battle between objectivity and subjectivity, which we talked about earlier in the week. And the moon in Virgo is plainly, clearly, and painfully objective. Whereas the swampy mob over here is painfully subjective. And so today we're working out Still, in the kind of the not even the 3/4 light, but we're still dealing with the light of that full moon illuminating justice, or in this case, the lack thereof. And one of the most alarming things that came out of this exposition of the material, and this all happened last night on Fox News, is that at least that's where it surfaced, is that Jacob Chansley, well, aka QAnon shaman, his lawyer had never seen any of the footage where he had been led around the Capitol by Capitol Police. He was escorted. It was like he had a VIP pass. He was never allowed to see that footage, even after numerous attempts to access that footage. The judge, who basically put him into prison for, what, 4 or 5 years, did he see that footage? If he had, he might have had a different ruling about Jacob Chansley's actions and motivations. What you see ultimately, and what we saw a long time ago, we saw part of this footage a long time ago, was this guy led a prayer in the Senate chambers. He led a prayer. And so now we have this inconjunct between the moon and Libra, which is seeking balance and justice, and Mercury and Pisces getting kind of sussed out, right? It's coming to the surface. Well, these are collective events, but they also have resonance and meaning on a personal level. And so what we're trying to do here is piece together things that intuitively or subjectively we know, but we have to bring them to an emotional level. And then we have to balance them out. So when we get into this Mercury and Pisces, especially behind the sun here, when we get into Mercury and Pisces, you know, we're sorting through the things that, you know, might be real, might be fictional. You know, this is what we're doing. And we're working towards kind of balancing these undercurrents of thought. We're working on balancing them out in our day-to-day existence today, particularly. So if you had a night where you had some weird dreams, I bet you're working it out with this Libra moon. Like, what did that mean? What do I do with this material, right? And that's just part of it. This is a very interesting dance, and it's just happening, you know, this morning, just for a few hours, and then the moon will move on, and then eventually it'll move into an in conjunct with the sun, and later, I guess it'll be tomorrow, it'll move into an in conjunct with Neptune. So this whole kind of in conjunct process with the moon over the next 24 hours is going to be really interesting, because these are heavy hitters back here, right? They're heavy hitters. And so we're doing our best to balance things out. And what we're trying to balance out, sometimes we're not even fully aware of it. We know it's there. It's this deep undercurrent, and it's forcing us to work emotionally. And sometimes it's just internal stuff, like, okay, I'm going to deal with my fear, I'm going to deal with my paranoia, whatever those things are. I'm going to deal with my anxiety. I just have to find a way to balance some of that out. Now, there's tools available that you can do that with. Let's look at Mercury at 11 degrees. It's getting closer to this sextile with Uranus, so you can move through things quickly. That's the beauty of this sextile. You can move through things very rapidly, right? Once you attune your emotional compass, you know, you can balance this stuff out fairly fast. So these are unconventional ways of also communicating. What would that look like, or even sound like? You know, do you sing? Do you sing in your car? Do you chant? Do you tone? This is a way to kind of get in touch with some of that stuff. You're communicating in a non-traditional fashion, which a Mercury sextile to Uranus absolutely loves and resonates with, and especially in very earthy Taurus, where you're getting into the throat. So if you're stuck and you're dealing with this thing back here and you can't really resolve it, sing it out, speak it out, shout it out, get it out. I think that would be a good prescription. We have the sun moving into closer conjunction with Neptune. Now we're about 6 degrees away. It's a comfortable conjunction. It will be for the next couple of days. But when we get into the weekend, that Sun-Neptune conjunction gets really tight, very, very tight. And the blurring between the individual and sort of the mass psychosis of society gets very, very thin, very thin. There's also, what I would call the sort of the Jesus fever in the air, right? I think we'll see some of that this weekend. The film Jesus Revolution was just released. I don't know what kind of impact it's going to have on, on society, but it's in the air now. And I think this weekend we'll have some interesting looks and insights into Jesus fever. The sun moving also closer into square with Mars, and now Mars is just 2 degrees off of Neptune. And again, we're looking at finger pointing and blame and scapegoating. And, when we look at the scrim of our reality, we get to see these events played out. We get to see these astrological dynamics played out. Now, all of a sudden, Tucker Carlson, he's Tucker bad. Tucker playing the role of George Orwell. And look, I'm not here to carry water for Tucker Carlson. I think Tucker Carlson's in on the game, okay? But that said, this is what's happening here. This is what's happening. How can you do this? How can you bring this information to the public? You're rewriting history. This is Orwellian. This is all Mars, Neptune square stuff, and especially in Gemini, because you're dealing with two sides of this story, right? And for a long time, since January 6th in 2021, there's been one side of this story. Now, the other side of the story is coming out. There's your Mars and Gemini, and it's squaring off against this deeply subjective, swampy mob. So this is interesting. This is very interesting stuff. But we haven't reached the peak yet. By the time we get to Friday and that Mars-Neptune square, now we're starting to hit that fever pitch. And then what happens when things get too hot? They create a distraction. That's what happens. So keep your eyes and ears attuned to distraction territory. But I think this is really interesting energy. In a personal chart, when you have a Mars-Neptune square, you're having to deal with, I think it's a really big addiction square, by the way. I think of all the squares to Neptune, I think Mars-Neptune is the one that has the most potential for addiction. So there's that part of it, but there's also, and it's like, well, why? Why would it be related to addiction? Well, let's use alcohol. I think it's a good example. They call alcohol liquid courage. And so when you have somebody that has a Mars-Neptune square in their chart, they may feel more emboldened to act. That alcohol fills the void of confidence and action. And then what happens? They get addicted to the thing that gives them the permission to advance their Mars, right? So that's another thing that's kind of in the air right now, is the whole notion of addiction. And this is really interesting. Who was it? Was it Lindsey Graham? Lindsey Graham's talking about sending troops now to Mexico, right? This is something that's been happening. They've been talking about this off and on, but now it's in the air. So here we have Mars squaring off against Neptune, And now we have a new quote unquote war on drugs. He's just doing this because he wants to, again, distract people from what's happening with all of this footage that's being resurfaced or surfaced for the first time. But this is also a war on drugs in general. And keep your eyes and ears attuned to news about the cartels and just how deeply embedded they are into our culture. So very interesting energy as we lead up to the weekend, potentially explosive as well. Meanwhile, we have this cozy stellium of Aries right here, Venus at 21, getting a little closer and closer to Juno. If I was going to get married, I'd think about doing it this Venus and Aries season. I would, especially as it gets close to Juno. That's a perfect marriage conjunction, and that's going to be what, 8 days, roughly 8 days. And at that time, the sun will have already transited across Neptune, right? So it will be leading the pack. It won't be delusional, because that's what's happening right now with Neptune Sun conjunction. We're being led by some very interesting energies. A lot of interesting energies, right? Victim energy, superstitious. But once the sun gets ahead of Neptune, it's taking charge. Right now we're kind of moving through the fog. With the sun behind Neptune, we're kind of moving through the fog, the fog of information, the fog of disinformation. But once it moves out in front, look out. Onward, Christian soldier. Anyway, if you're going to get married in the next 8 days, congratulations, you picked a great time. We talked about the Mercury sextile to Uranus. That's a goodie. The sun is in sextile to Uranus. Do something different. Do something a little different. Break up your routine today. You'll be rewarded for that. Let's see, we've got a square going on. Venus and Pluto square. Even when we get to the Venus-Pluto square, that's till death do you part. Another good reason to fire up the wedding party. By and large, I like today. There's also this notion of being fair in relationship with others, while also looking after the needs of the self, right? Jupiter opposing the moon. This could work out. If you have a great feeling, if you have passion and kind of an expansive mood that you're in, and you want to share it and channel it in conjunction with others, it's quite possible. Quite possible. But there is a choice, right? Do you lean in and just indulge in, hey, this is what I want to do. These are my feelings. This is my impetus, my drive, my will. Or do you go over here and say, well, I'm going to share my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Here, you can have half. Nothing wrong with that. I'd say this is a pretty good day. On the collective theater, watch out. Watch out. It's going to be very interesting. Very interesting. And particularly, 7 days from now, when the sun moves ahead of Neptune, clarity. Right now, the high beams are on. We're just, it's kind of a good metaphor, I guess. You're not supposed to drive with your high beams in the fog, but your fog lamps, the fog lamps are on right now. The fog lamps are on, and we're moving through the haze of disinformation, misinformation, and illusion. All right, let's talk about our star of the day. He's controversial. And I have a very controversial quote. But what would this show be like without some good controversy? Cue up Prince. Let me find this thing. Is it? Oh, yes, it is. Now remember, I am reading a quote that is attributed to this person. And the reason I'm reading this quote is because it's an important part of his life and his story, which for a lot of people is quite uncomfortable. But when you look at his chart, we're gonna pull some of these pieces apart and make a case as to why Bobby Fischer was one of the most dangerous people ever. And I'm going to pull this up right now. So today's star of the day is Bobby Fischer. And Bobby Fischer's life can literally be dissected into two parts. There's Bobby Fischer, the enfant terrible chess player who annihilated every single chess player on the planet. Bobby Fischer was like the Bruce Lee of chess. And this guy was so freaking smart. Not only was he a savant at chess, but what he would do is he would read accounts of all of these Russian chess players. Like he had a dossier on them and understood the Russian mind when it came to playing. And that really helped him. But then he went a couple layers further and he figured out that a lot of the Russians threw their matches, that they said it was kind of like their great players were, it was almost like WWE wrestling. He figured this out and he consistently called them out on it. And he was absolutely and utterly feared by the Russians. So during this time where we have this whole Cold War battle going on with the Russians, Bobby Fischer might have been the one American that actually took the Russians on, took the Soviets on, and dismantled them at their own game. So we have that side of Bobby Fischer. And then at a certain point, Bobby Fischer, who is Jewish, begins to look at his own faith, culture, religion, and he sees it in a very different light. So this is his quote. He says, "My main interest right now is to expose the Jews." Keep in mind, he's Jewish, okay? This is a lot bigger than me. They're not just persecuting me. This is not just my struggle. I'm not just doing this for myself. This is life and death for the world. These goddamn Jews have to be stopped. They're a menace to the whole world. And what's interesting about Bobby Fischer, right, is that, you know, if somebody like Mel Gibson came out and said something like that, which he almost did, man, the ADL, the JDL, the muscle of the Khazarian mafia would have come out and ruined Mel Gibson. The ADL and the JDL were actually afraid of Bobby Fischer. They were afraid of him because, number one, unlike Mel Gibson, who's a Gentile, Bobby Fischer comes from their world, right? And number two, Bobby Fischer is smarter than anybody who is going to go after him and persecute him. But you can see like these delineations with Bobby Fischer, with Gemini. Like there's one side of Bobby Fischer that in the chess world is very Saturnian. He's really Saturnian. And then there's this other side of Bobby Fischer where he takes this radical exit to the right. And by the way, what's interesting about Bobby Fischer is that he has quotes that they kind of transcend his ongoing struggle in battle with his upbringing and his past. He basically says, in one quote, whites need to move back to Europe and give the country back to the Native Americans, right? So Bobby Fischer is this really strange cat. He kind of sees things in black and white, which is a chess metaphor. But we can also see here with Leo on the ascendant and Pluto right here also on the ascendant, that he's an intense and extreme character. Intense and extreme. And that's what you deal with Pluto on the ascendant, especially the Bobby Fischer hated to lose. Absolutely hated to lose. But he's bright. He's got Mercury in Aquarius. He's got the South Node here, also conjunct Aquarius. So it's almost as if he had to bring chess into the foreground in his life. Like he was born with this preternatural ability to see the game at multiple levels very quickly. But then he moves through chess. It's like he's done with it. At a certain point, he kind of hates chess, right? It's like he has this gift in the burden, which to me is what happens when you have a planet around the South Node. You have a gift and a burden, and you don't always stay with it. Once you exercise it, you exercise it. So he has this, but he also has this square with Saturn and this square with Uranus. And Bobby Fischer is what? He's a rebel. And he is an iconoclast, an absolute rebel and iconoclast. He's brilliant. He fights against the system. And people think he's fucking crazy. Now, one of the things that he does is he eventually leaves the United States. And he moves to two different places. He moves to Japan for quite a period of time. He's done with the United States. He's done with the United States. He's done with the system. He's gone, right? And then after that, he moves to Finland. And I think he has political asylum in Finland. And I also think he married a Japanese wife. He has Venus on the midheaven in Aries, which is interesting because Bobby Fischer is not a peacemaker. You get the kind of aggressive kind of Venus position. The other thing that's interesting about Bobby Fischer is he has this one quote about black. Black, of course, being one of the pieces in the chessboard. And apparently, when you're starting off and you're moving second with black, which is kind of an interesting metaphor, actually. And have any critical race theory people thought about this? That in chess, white always moves first? I don't know. I'm sure they have. But he's got this quote where he basically says, you change the game when black plays to win and not just keep up. It's a really interesting quote. He's talking about chess, but I think he's talking about something else as well. Bobby Fischer is one of the most enigmatic, brilliant, dangerous people that we've had in the 20th century. He was so dangerous that the people that he was openly criticizing wanted no part of him. Now, of course, there was a reason why he lived in Japan, a reason why he lived in Finland, partially because he denounced the United States, but also because he knew that he could never have some of these points of views inside the United States. He's a very polarizing figure. You get that with Pluto. You get it, right? Pluto is polarizing here. You either love this person or you despise this person. And there was no middle ground with Bobby Fischer. He had Mars in Aquarius, so he was aggressive, right? He was argumentative. He had this moon in Taurus, and man, when he got into a chess match, he wasn't just playing against the other player, he was playing against the organizers. He was playing against the networks that were carrying the chess match. He had already beaten his opponent. He was working on the environment that was trying their very best to knock him off his game. And he knew this, right? So one of the things that Bobby Fischer was tagged with was paranoia. But if you understood what was going on with the Soviet Union at that time and some of the things that they were up to, just in terms of parapsychology, you'd be paranoid too if you played one of their players. So we see this with Bobby Fischer and that uber aggressive Mars and Aquarius. And that's where we get this idea of this quote around black. And it's like, again, in chess, like there's this whole psychology. If you're black, then you're trying to play the game to just sort of stay in there, hang in there, because you're always a move behind, right? He changed it. He changed it. He changed the model by making black the aggressor in chess. That's a Mars in Aquarius move. And this guy's contentious, right? If you're in a chess match, that's a seventh house. That's a seventh house relationship, by the way. If you're in a chess match one-on-one with Bobby Fischer, you're dealing with his Mars. Like, look out. And he's got a grand trine. He has a grand trine, grand air trine. This guy's formidable, right? He's nutty. There's no doubt about it. Bobby Fischer is absolutely nutty. One of the things that you'll notice is the lack of earth in his chart. He's not very grounded. He's got the moon in Taurus, and he's argumentative, and he's got that moon Pluto square. He's got this T square going on right here, and these are fixed, so he's not moving off of his position at all. But he doesn't have a lot of earth, and his relationship with his mother is, I mean, he really like cracks on his mother later in life. And we have this moon Neptune in conjunct. And I feel like Bobby Fischer probably felt like an orphan in the world, because number one, he's born into the Jewish culture, but then he denounces it. He's an American, and then he denounces that, really. He's a great chess player, and then he tosses chess aside and says, it was a worthless pursuit in a lot of ways. So Bobby Fischer's like an orphan, and you can see this with this moon Neptune in conjunct. He's a very complex character, a very polarizing character, and a person who stood on his own principles for better or for worse. So there's your star of the day, one Robert Fischer. All right, thanks for being here. As you know, I do a show after this one. It's called 15 Minutes of Flame. And it is right here, 9:11 a.m., 10:41 Central Standard Time. And today we're going to get into more of the Jan 6 stuff. We covered some of that yesterday. And we're going to get into more of it because I think it's an important story. I mean, what's really weird is that if you go back and watch a lot of the shows that I did during that time, we were all over this stuff. We were all over it. And here we are, it was 2 years later. And they're finally coming around. They're finally getting to the point where we were 2 years ago. Anyway, we'll talk more about that. If you like CBD, like I like CBD, go to truehempscience.com. That's truehempscience.com. And check out their wide variety of organically sourced CBD. And if you order $100 or more of their product, just drop 15 MINS into the checkout box, and you'll get some free goodies. And you'll love the free goodies. So that's truehempscience.com. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful and blessed day. We'll see you tomorrow.